I was 16 when the air in our house began to feel like it had weight, pressing down on my shoulders and chest, making it hard to breathe without feeling like I was stealing oxygen that didn't belong to me. Our home wasn't much. A two-story place with paint the color of stale milk, windows that rattled in the wind, and floorboards that groaned underfoot. But it might as well have been a fortress, not to keep danger out, but to keep me in. My father filled the rooms like a storm cloud, a presence so heavy that even when he was silent, you could feel him in the air. His boots would thud across the floor in slow, deliberate steps, each one a warning signal I could read like Morse code. Angry, drunk, both. My mother, once quick to laugh, moved like a ghost when he was home, eyes lowered, hands busying themselves with tasks that didn't need doing. I learned young that my safest place was invisibility. Breathing quietly, choosing the creak-free path from room to room, speaking only when spoken to. My bedroom, tucked under the sloped roof, was the only corner that felt remotely mine. The ceiling was so low I could brush it with my fingertips from bed, and the walls carried every sound from the rest of the house. The clink of my father's bottle caps, the ticking of the hallway clock, the faint hum of the fridge. Some nights, I'd lie awake and pretend the sounds came from somewhere else entirely, a place where my name wasn't a trigger for dread. But no matter how far I drifted in my mind, reality always dragged me back when his voice called for me, deep and sharp, like a hook to the ribs. The moment I realized how little of myself I was allowed to keep came on an unremarkable spring afternoon. The sun poured through the kitchen window, making the dust in the air look like slow-moving stars, and outside, the smell of cut grass drifted in. I was at the table with my sketchbook, a secret I kept hidden under my mattress, filling a page with the outlines of a city I'd never seen. Towers and bridges rose in pencil strokes, streets winding into places where the air might be easier to breathe. My father walked in, took one look, and without a word, ripped the page free. The sound of paper tearing was louder than anything he could have shouted. He crumpled it once and dropped it into the trash like it was nothing, then left without looking at me. My mother didn't flinch. She just held her mug of tea with both hands, staring past me as though I wasn't there. That was when it sank in. It wasn't just my time or my body he controlled. It was my mind, my right to imagine anything beyond these walls. I went upstairs afterward, staring at the pencil smudges on my fingertips, and for the first time, I thought about what it would take to leave for good. The thought scared me, but it also lit something deep in my chest, a small ember that would take years to grow into flame. The following months blurred together in a slow, heavy crawl. My days were built from the same pieces: school, chores, silence. Every hour I spent outside the house felt like stolen time, borrowed light before the darkness swallowed me again. But then, in the unlikeliest place, I found something I didn't know I'd been starving for. Someone who saw me. Her name was Rachel. We met in the art room after school, where I'd taken to hiding just to avoid walking home too early. She had paint under her fingernails and a voice that made even the most ordinary words sound alive. She looked at my sketches and didn't laugh, didn't dismiss them as childish or pointless. She asked questions: where the bridges led, who lived in the houses I drew. And when I couldn't answer, she just smiled like she already knew. With her, I felt the walls around me shift, if only for an hour at a time. But back home, the fortress closed in again. If I could just get to my 18th birthday, I told myself, I could walk out the door and never look back. But time in that house didn't move like it did anywhere else. It dragged, each day like wet cement hardening around my ankles. Every time my father slammed a door or my mother flinched at his voice, the ember inside me flared, reminding me that staying meant surrender, and surrender meant erasure. The breaking point came sooner than I planned. One winter night, after a day of constant barking orders and thinly veiled threats, my father cornered me in the kitchen. He accused me of stealing from his wallet, a lie, but one I knew better than to fight. The shouting grew sharper, louder, and then his hands were on my shoulders, shoving me hard enough that my back slammed into the counter. My vision swam. My mother stood frozen in the doorway, her face pale, her hands trembling at her sides. That was the moment something inside me snapped. Not in rage, rage had been there for years, but in clarity. I saw my future if I stayed. A long, slow fade into a life built on fear. That night, after they went to bed, I pulled my shoebox from under the floorboard, stuffed it into my backpack with a few clothes, my sketchbook, and the bus schedule I'd memorized. I left before dawn, the frost crunching under my shoes, my breath sharp in the cold air. I didn't look back, because if I did, I might stop, and if I stopped, I'd never leave. The bus ride out of town felt like crossing an invisible border. The streets I'd known my whole life blurred past the window, smaller and smaller until they disappeared. My chest ached, but it wasn't grief. It was something heavier, tangled with relief and terror. I didn't have a plan beyond the first step. I stayed with a friend of Rachel's for a week, sleeping on a couch, the shoebox of money dwindling faster than I wanted to admit. But every morning I woke up and realized I hadn't heard my father's voice in hours, and that alone felt like a luxury. I found work washing dishes in a small diner, the kind where the smell of frying onions clings to your clothes. It was exhausting, my hands always red from hot water, but it was mine. Every dollar I earned felt like a brick in the wall between me and the life I'd escaped. Of course, freedom isn't as clean as just walking away. My father called the diner once, his voice low and dangerous, telling me I'd made a mistake, that I'd regret leaving. My mother never called. Weeks turned into months, and sometimes I'd wake in the middle of the night, convinced I'd hear his boots on the floor outside my door. But the fear started to fade, replaced by something steadier, resolve. Rachel and I stayed in touch, though distance made it harder. She sent me a small set of watercolor paints for my birthday, and I used them on quiet evenings, building new cities on paper, this time without hiding them under a mattress. Years later, I heard my father had gotten sick. People asked if I'd go back, if I'd see him one last time. But the truth was, I'd already said my goodbye the night I walked out into the frost. I wasn't the boy who lived in that coffin house anymore. I'd built something different, fragile maybe, but mine. I had a small apartment with a window that let in the sunrise, a table covered in brushes and paints, friends who laughed loud and without fear. I'd learned that surviving wasn't just about leaving. It was about refusing to carry the weight of someone else's cruelty any longer than you had to. Sometimes I still think about the boy I was, quiet, watchful, hiding his drawings from the man who wanted to break him. I wish I could tell him that the walls wouldn't hold forever, that there was light beyond the window if he could just keep going long enough to reach it. I'd tell him the air would feel different one day, lighter, warmer, his own. And maybe that's why I'm telling you this now. Because if you're living in a house where the air feels heavy, where your voice doesn't belong to you, I want you to know you're not alone, and you are not powerless. There is a way out, even if you can't see it yet. Thank you for listening to my story, and if it meant something to you, please like, comment, and subscribe to Kindle Stories Official. It's how we keep sharing the stories that remind us none of us are as trapped as we think.